You didn't just watch a routine royal update. You watched an ancient system reach its breaking point. A moment where the most carefully controlled institution in Britain finally admitted that it could no longer manage the reality it had tried so hard to polish. 1 minute ago, the atmosphere at Buckingham Palace shifted from one of calculated silence to a chilling, unexpected honesty. King Charles III and Princess Anne, the two most hard-working and stoic siblings of the House of Windsor, stood side by side before the cameras. And for the first time in history, the mask of the monarchy didn't just slip, it was shattered. This wasn't just about a change in schedule or a minor medical procedure. This was a turning point for the future of the British throne. As I've watched this pattern in every fragile institution that's more afraid of truth than of scandal, I saw the familiar signs of a crisis that the palace machine could no longer suppress. Charles, his voice quivering with a weight that duty alone cannot explain, confirmed what many had whispered in the shadows of the palace corridors. The transition of the crown has already begun, and it is far more sudden and far more serious than anyone in power wanted you to know. Look closely at the screen. If you've followed the royal crisis analysis style, you'll notice the cracks in the armor. Charles, a man who has lived by protocol for over 7 decades, looked smaller, his eyes betraying a truth that no official statement could ever contain. Beside him, Princess Anne, the Shadow Queen, and the monarchy's ultimate stabilizing force, didn't offer the usual cold, royal reassurance. Her expression was one of raw vulnerability, confirming the haunting question that has lingered over London for weeks. Can an institution built on the illusion of immortality survive the very human reality of its leader's decline? For months, they fed us polished narratives. They told us everything is fine, while the schedules were secretly cancelled, and the future of the monarchy was being rewritten behind closed doors. But silence in a public institution eventually becomes a confession. This wasn't transparency. It was the truth being dragged out at the last possible moment, because the palace machine reached a point where it could no longer control the narrative. Before you believe the official spin that will surely follow this announcement, you need to understand what this transition really means. It's not just about a title moving from one person to another. It's about a system that depends on a few humanized faces, suddenly realizing those faces are mortal. The monarchy doesn't just manage feelings, it manages perception, and tonight, that perception has been shattered by the king himself. As the news tickers across the world scramble to catch up, we have to ask, what did Charles see at the bedside of the monarchy that terrified him more than bad headlines? This is the night the fairy tale ended, and the survival test began. The announcement we just witnessed didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the explosive climax of a silence that had been building for months. A silence so heavy it began to suffocate the very people it was meant to protect. For weeks, the royal schedule, once a symbol of rhythmic stability, began to stutter and stop. Engagements were cancelled with vague excuses, photos were delayed, and every time the public asked for a sign of life, the palace machine responded with the same hollow script: privacy, space, recovery. But silence in a public institution is never an accident. It is a management strategy. While the world watched empty balconies and read rehearsed bulletins, the gears inside the castle walls were grinding to a halt. Think of a historic manor with cracks hidden behind expensive paintings. You can only rehang the art so many times before the structure itself demands to be seen. This was the setting the stage phase, a period where the crown tried to control reality until reality became impossible to contain. Those closest to the center noticed it first, the physical toll that protocol couldn't hide. Charles's movements became more measured, his eyes carrying a look of deep, unfiltered exhaustion that no amount of royal grooming could erase. We see the same pattern here as we did with Kate. This is the physiognomy of crisis, the moment where the physical signs of aging and illness are linked to the internal decay of the institution. Every missed luncheon, every faint tremor in a hand during a speech, was a breadcrumb leading us to this night. Why the silence? Because for a monarchy, transparency is the enemy of mystery. They feared that admitting the truth too early would spark the very panic they are now facing. They treated the king's health not as a human condition, but as a security risk, to be managed by aides in suits who have forgotten that the crown belongs to the people, not to the vaults. The public was fed polished palace lines, but they felt the vibration of the cracks. You knew, deep down, that you weren't watching privacy. You were watching a system reaching its breaking point. And yet, as the public's anxiety turned into a storm of speculation, the friction behind the gates reached a fever pitch. It was a battle between the traditionalists, who wanted to keep the mask on forever, and the realists, who saw that the mask was already in pieces. But what finally broke that silence? What was the one leaked detail that made Charles realize that hiding was no longer an option? Behind the heavy, gilded doors of the king's private study, a meeting took place that was never meant to be recorded in the official court circular. This was the engine room of the monarchy in crisis. It wasn't a gathering of PR experts or constitutional lawyers. It was a conversation between two siblings who have spent their entire lives serving a crown that often asks for their souls in return. While the public saw a united front on camera 1 minute ago, the reality of what Charles and Princess Anne discussed in private is what truly defines this transition. Princess Anne has long been described as the Shadow Queen, the one who does the work without needing the spotlight. But in this transition, her role has shifted from supportive sister to the monarchy's ultimate life support system. As Charles faced the undeniable reality of his condition, he didn't turn to a committee. He turned to the person who shares his DNA and his dedication to the late Queen's mantra, duty first, always. The pact they made is the secret backbone of this announcement. It is a plan for a shadow regency, a way to keep the crown functioning while the king retreats, ensuring that the void left by his absence isn't filled by chaos or the ever-present hunger of the tabloid press. Why Anne? Because the transition to William, though inevitable, is fraught with its own complications. William is a man torn between a sick wife and a collapsing institution. Charles knows that pushing William too hard, too fast, could break the very man who is supposed to save the monarchy. By bringing Anne to the forefront, Charles is creating a buffer zone. This is the strategic positioning that the palace won't explain. They are using Anne's stoicism to buy William time and to give Charles the space to fade without the crown losing its luster. When you look at Anne standing beside Charles, you aren't just seeing a sister. You are seeing the guardian of the transition. Her presence is a message to the world. The king may be weak, but the system is still iron. But even iron has a melting point. Inside that study, sources say the conversation wasn't just about logistics. It was about the fear of a vacuum. Charles reportedly asked Anne to be the anchor for a family that feels like it's drifting into a storm it cannot survive. This transition isn't a simple handover. It's a desperate re-engineering of an ancient machine. The palace is trying to convince you that this is a planned, orderly evolution. But the intensity in Anne's eyes and the hollowed-out look on Charles's face tell a different story. They are reacting to a crisis, not following a script. And as this shadow regency begins to take effect, the question remains, can a monarchy lead from the shadows, or is the light of the crown already beginning to fail? At the center of this unfolding crisis stands a man whose silence is perhaps the most haunting of all. Prince William is no longer just the heir in waiting. He is a man watching the two central pillars of his life crumble simultaneously. As King Charles and Princess Anne stood before the world to confirm the transition, the camera didn't need to show William's face for us to feel the crushing weight of his position. This is what we call the impossible choice, a psychological crossroads where the demands of an ancient crown collide violently with the raw, bleeding needs of a husband and father. For years, William has been groomed to be the modern king, the one who would bridge the gap between tradition and the 21st century. But no amount of training could prepare him for a moment where his father's decline and his wife's health crisis occurred in the same breath. While the palace machine demands he step up, his heart is pulling him toward the bedside of the woman who has been his only true stabilizer. The royal crisis analysis reveals a chilling reality. William is currently a broken heir, not because he lacks strength, but because he has reached a human limit that the institution refuses to acknowledge. The palace expects a statue, a symbol of continuity that remains unshakable while everything else falls apart. But look at the subtle cues from the past few weeks. The tightened jaw, the hurried departures, the way he looks, not at the crown, but at the exit. This isn't the behavior of a man eager to lead. It's the behavior of a man trapped in a gilded cage of duty. Charles's announcement of a sudden transition is, in many ways, a death sentence for William's hope for a quiet, family-focused life. He is being forced to choose between being the king the nation needs and the husband Kate desperately requires. In the secret meetings leading up to this announcement, sources whisper that William's resistance was palpable. He didn't want this, not now, not like this. He knows that once he fully steps into the king's shadow, there is no going back. The transition isn't just a change in title. It's the final sacrifice of his personal life to the institution. But as Princess Anne steps forward to anchor the Shadow Regency, William finds himself in a limbo of grief and responsibility. The crown is a jealous master. It demands everything and offers no comfort in return. As Charles fades and the transition accelerates, William is realizing that the throne he spent his life preparing for is currently a seat of profound loneliness. He is the bridge to the future, but the bridge is cracked, and the world is watching to see if he will stand firm or if the weight of the impossible choice will finally bring him down. The fairy tale is gone. What's left is a man struggling to breathe under the weight of a 1,000-year-old legacy. The moment the statement ended, a second, more dangerous battle began: the war for the truth. In the digital age, a monarchy cannot simply issue a decree and expect the world to stop asking questions. What Charles and Princess Anne confirmed 1 minute ago was the result of a catastrophic failure in the palace's security blackout protocol. For decades, the House of Windsor relied on a silent pact with the press, a gentleman's agreement to keep the private struggles of the crown private. But that agreement died the moment the first leak about Charles's condition hit the international wires. This is the phase of the crisis I call the leak phenomenon. It's not just about journalists looking for a story. It's about a breakdown of loyalty within the palace walls. Sources whisper that for the first time in a generation, long-serving royal aides, people who have signed ironclad non-disclosure agreements, began to talk. Why? Not for money, but out of fear. They saw the Shadow Regency forming and realized that the old rules no longer applied. They saw a king in decline and a family in chaos, and they chose to speak to the media rather than be buried with the secrets of a sinking ship. The royal crisis analysis shows that the palace lost control because it tried to treat the king's health as a state secret rather than a human reality. This created an information vacuum, and as every analyst knows, a vacuum is always filled by noise. While the palace was busy polishing its rehearsed lines, social media was already dissecting every pixel of old footage, looking for the physiognomy of illness, the tremors, the weight loss, the confusion. By the time Charles stood before the cameras, the public had already built their own version of the truth, and the palace was forced to play catch-up. This loss of control is terrifying for an institution built on the illusion of absolute power. King Charles is reportedly livid, his fury not directed at the public, but at the leaks that forced his hand. He wanted to transition on his own terms, in his own time. Instead, he was hunted into transparency. This is the ultimate vulnerability of the modern crown. In a world of 24-hour news cycles and smartphone cameras, the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace are now made of glass. As the media scavenges for the full medical report and journalists pressure hospital insiders for a single leaked word, the monarchy is realizing that its greatest enemy isn't a political movement or a foreign power. It is the loss of its own mystery. The transition is no longer a dignified handover. It is a public autopsy of a reigning monarch's ability to lead. And as the international press, especially the unfiltered outlets in the United States, begins to ask the questions the British media is too polite to voice, the crown is facing a reality it cannot spin away. The people no longer just want to see the king. They want to see the truth behind the king. While the epicenter of this earthquake remains firmly rooted in the ancient stones of Buckingham Palace, the aftershocks are tearing through the manicured lawns of Montecito, California. 1 minute ago, As King Charles and Princess Anne stood together to confirm the crown's transition, an invisible ghost was present in the room, the ghost of the spare, who is no longer there to carry the weight. This is what I call the American reckoning, a moment where the geographical distance between the king and his younger son has finally translated into a strategic and emotional nightmare for the monarchy. The transition announcement has fundamentally changed Harry's status, from an exiled royal to a critical, yet missing, piece of the constitutional puzzle. In the royal crisis analysis, we see a chilling irony. The very institution that spent years trying to minimize Harry's importance now finds itself staring at a roster of working royals that is dangerously thin. The Harry-shaped hole in the monarchy has never been more visible than it is tonight. As Charles fades, the world isn't just looking at William. They are looking at the empty space where a brother, a confidant, and a second son should be standing. Sources close to the Duke of Sussex suggest that the news reached him not through a warm, personal call, but through the same cold, formal channels that have defined his exile. Imagine the psychological toll of watching your father and aunt announce the end of an era on a screen, thousands of miles away from the walls that used to be your home. Harry's reported reaction is one of restrained agony, the look of a man who knows his value to the institution has suddenly increased, but the emotional price for his return may be too high for anyone to pay. Princess Anne, ever the gatekeeper of the king's peace, is said to be the primary obstacle to any hasty reconciliation. She views the transition as a time for unshakable loyalty, something she believes Harry forfeited the moment he stepped onto that plane to California. But Charles, facing his own mortality, is caught in the ultimate death point of fatherly regret. He is a king who needs a stable transition, but he is also a father who does not want to leave this world with his family in ruins. This tension between the institutional machine, led by Anne, and the human heart of the king, is the secret conflict driving the drama behind the scenes. The American public, who have adopted the Sussexes as their own brand of royalty, are watching this transition with a different lens. They don't see a constitutional process. They see a family tragedy playing out on a global stage. This transatlantic pressure is forcing the palace to consider the unthinkable. Can the transition truly be successful if the spare remains a distant shadow, or will Harry's absence forever stain the beginning of William's era? The crown is trying to move forward, but the weight of the son who left is pulling it back into a past it desperately wants to forget. While the global audience remains fixated on the king's public appearances and the latest medical bulletins, they are overlooking the invisible hands that have actually seized the steering wheel of the British monarchy. 1 minute ago, the confirmation of the sudden transition didn't just signal King Charles's retreat into the shadows. It marked the official, though unwritten, commencement of Princess Anne's shadow regency. In the cold reality of royal crisis analysis, we understand that in a moment of existential instability, a monarchy does not require a charismatic figurehead. It demands a functional operator. Anne is that operator. She is the only figure within the inner circle who possesses the iron grip required to prevent the palace from descending into a civil war between competing factions of aides, advisors, and family members. Anne's rise to this unofficial power is a masterclass in institutional survival. She is not interested in the crown for herself. She is interested in the crown's survival. Sources inside the palace describe a palpable shift in the atmosphere the moment she took command of the transition protocols. The shadow regency means that while William is at Kate's side and Charles is behind closed doors, Anne is the one signing the internal directives, briefing the security teams, and most importantly, managing the friction with Queen Camilla. There is a silent, high-stakes battle here that the public is only starting to sense. A struggle between a queen consort who wants to maintain her status and a princess royal who believes that personal ambition must be burned at the altar of duty. Look at Anne's physiognomy of power. She doesn't smile for the cameras because she knows that a smile in a crisis is a lie. Her stoicism is the anchor for a nation that feels its foundation shaking. For a modern audience accustomed to the performative vulnerability of the Sussexes, Anne is a chillingly different breed. She represents a time when the monarchy was a silent machine of service. Her iron grip is felt in the way the media leaks have suddenly slowed since she took oversight of the communications team. She is purging the ranks, removing anyone whose loyalty is to a headline rather than to the king. But this grip comes with a heavy price. To hold the line so firmly, Anne has had to become the necessary villain in many internal family narratives. She is the one saying no to Harry's requests for a meeting. She is the one telling a grieving William that his personal sorrow must be scheduled around state requirements. This is the ultimate death point, or fatal point, of her position. She is the protector of the institution, but in doing so, she risks becoming the person the rest of the family fears most. As the shadow Regency becomes the new reality, we have to ask, is Anne saving the monarchy, or is she merely delaying an inevitable collapse by holding together a structure that is no longer flexible enough to survive? The transition is now in her hands, and under her watch, there will be no more excuses, no more calculated silences, only the cold, hard execution of royal duty. The machine is moving again, but it is moving under the command of a woman who has forgotten how to be anything other than a servant of the crown. The light of the monarchy is fading, and Anne is the one standing in the dark, making sure the fire doesn't go out entirely. While the world reels from the official confirmation of the transition, the most chilling details aren't found in the teleprompter scripts or the polished press releases. They are found in what was left unsaid. 1 minute ago, the palace used a very specific, carefully engineered phrase, a progressive, life-altering condition. In the world of royal crisis analysis, this is not a medical diagnosis. It is a linguistic fortress designed to protect the crown's image while the king's physical reality collapses. The word progressive is the most haunting of all. It is a polite way of telling the nation that there is no recovery, only a steady, inevitable descent. The sanitization of the king's health is a desperate act of preservation. For months, the palace machine has worked overtime to hide the physical markers of this crisis. But as we apply the physiognomy of decline, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Look at the recent footage of the king's hands, the subtle but persistent tremors that he tries to mask by clutching his lapels or tucking them into his pockets. Notice the deepening hollows beneath his eyes and the specific, rhythmic way he now pauses mid-sentence, not for dramatic effect, but to recapture a train of thought that is slipping away. These are the physical confessions of a body that is no longer in sync with the demands of the throne. Behind the scenes, the medical blackout has been total. Sources whisper of specialists being flown into Sandringham under the cover of darkness, booked through shell companies to avoid detection by the prying eyes of the paparazzi. These are not general practitioners. They are experts in degenerative and neurological care. The transition isn't just about Charles wanting to rest. It's about a man who has spent 70 years waiting for his moment, only to realize that his body has become a traitor to his ambition. The psychological toll of this betrayal is immense. A king who is mentally present enough to know he is fading, yet physically unable to stop the process. The palace continues to release images of the king working at his desk. But these are carefully staged tableaux. The red boxes are there. The pens are in place. But look at the eyes. They are the eyes of a man staring into a fog. The announcement hinted at reduced duties, but the reality is a shadow administration. The king is no longer reading the full intelligence briefings. He is being given the sanitized versions by Princess Anne and his private secretaries. This is the ultimate crisis of a constitutional monarchy. How do you maintain the illusion of a reigning monarch when the individual wearing the crown can no longer sustain the cognitive load of the office? The public is being fed a narrative of orderly transition, but what they aren't being told is the sheer scale of the medical intervention required just to keep the king appearing functional for 5 minutes of film. This is the hidden medical crisis, a battle against time and biology that the palace is losing every single day. The announcement was a white flag, a concession that the facade could no longer be maintained. As we move deeper into this transition, the world must prepare for the moment when even the most sophisticated PR cannot hide the fact that the king is no longer the man he was. The crown remains, but the man within it is being slowly, painfully reclaimed by his own mortality. While the spotlight of the transition announcement falls primarily on the bloodline, Charles, Anne, and William, there is a figure standing in the periphery whose world is collapsing in a uniquely devastating way. Queen Camilla, the woman who fought for decades to be accepted by both the institution and the public, now finds herself facing the ultimate death point of her position. Her power, her protection, and her status are entirely tethered to a man who is now retreating from the world. 1 minute ago, as Charles confirmed the crown's transition, Camilla's expression revealed the silent agony of a wife who is being sidelined by the very palace machine she worked so hard to join. This is the collapsing circle, the moment where the personal bond of a marriage is forcibly separated from the cold requirements of the state. In the world of royal crisis analysis, Camilla's current situation is a masterclass in institutional isolation. For years, she has been the king's primary emotional anchor, the one person who could soothe his temper and share his burdens. But as Princess Anne establishes the shadow regency, the role of the queen consort is being minimized. Anne represents the firm, while Camilla represents the man, and in a transition crisis, the firm always wins. We see the physiognomy of isolation in Camilla's recent public appearances, the forced smiles that don't reach her eyes, the way she looks toward Charles, not for a cue, but with a desperate, protective instinct that she is no longer allowed to act upon. She is being relegated to a lonely vigil, watching her husband fade, while the administrative gears of the monarchy move on without her input. The secret tension inside the palace is whispered to be a quiet war between the queen consort and the princess royal. Anne believes that the transition must be clinical and uninterrupted by personal sentiment. Camilla, however, sees the man behind the crown, the man who is tired, frightened, and in need of his wife, not a regent. This conflict is the hidden fracture in the family's united front. Camilla knows that once the transition is complete and William ascends, her influence will vanish overnight. She will go from being the most powerful woman in the room to a dowager queen, a relic of a previous reign, likely sidelined even further by a new, younger court. The psychological toll on Camilla is immense. She has endured decades of public scrutiny and scandal, only to reach the pinnacle of her journey and find it shrouded in illness and transition. Her lonely vigil is not just about the king's health. It is about the realization that the royal machine has no room for the heart once the crown begins its journey to the next head. She is watching the circle of her life collapse inward, leaving her as a spectator to her own husband's departure from power. As the transition accelerates, Camilla's absence from key strategy meetings is a loud, ringing silence. She is the king's heart, but Princess Anne has become the king's hand. This part 9 of our analysis reveals the most human tragedy of the transition, that even at the highest levels of power, love is often the first thing sacrificed to ensure the survival of the institution. Camilla stands as a testament to the fact that you can win the crown, but you can never truly defeat the cold, unfeeling demands of the throne. The dust may begin to settle on the formal announcement, but the world that King Charles III and Princess Anne left behind 1 minute ago is fundamentally different from the one we knew this morning. We have witnessed the final reckoning of a reign that was decades in the making, but maybe centuries in its consequences. This transition is not merely a logistical handover of duties, it is a profound admission that the 1,000-year-old institution of the British monarchy is facing its most dangerous survival test in the modern era. The legacy of King Charles is now hanging in a delicate balance between his lifelong dedication to duty and the sudden, brutal reality of his own mortality. What we have analyzed over these 10 chapters is the anatomy of a collapse and the desperate attempt at a reconstruction. We saw the shadow regency of Princess Anne, the impossible choice facing Prince William, the transatlantic ghost of Harry, and the hidden medical crisis that could no longer be contained behind gilded walls. This is the full circle of the crisis. Charles waited 70 years to sit on the throne, only to find that the crown is heavier than even he imagined, and the time he has to wear it is shorter than anyone dared to fear. His legacy will not be defined by the grand reforms he hoped to implement, but by how he managed the reset of the monarchy during its darkest hour. The palace machine is currently working at maximum capacity to project an image of calm and continuity. They want you to believe that the system is unshakable, that the line of succession is a solid bridge to the future. But as we apply our royal crisis analysis, we see the truth. The bridge is made of people, and people are fragile. The monarchy has lost its human heart in the absence of a healthy Kate and a strong Charles. It is now a machine running on the pure, cold willpower of Princess Anne and the duty-bound exhaustion of Prince William. The question is no longer whether the monarchy will survive, but what kind of monarchy will be left when the storm finally passes. As this transition accelerates, the public is left with a haunting realization. The mystery of the crown has been replaced by the transparency of tragedy. For the millions of loyal followers, especially those who have grown old alongside this family, this isn't just news, it is a personal grief. You are watching a family in freefall, trying to maintain their dignity while the ground approaches. Charles and Anne have confirmed the transition, but they cannot confirm the outcome. They have given us the facts, but the truth remains hidden in the quiet corridors of Sandringham and the worried eyes of a future king. This is the end of the narrative as the palace wrote it, and the beginning of a reality that none of us can predict. The crown remains, but the fairy tale has finally been replaced by the cold, heavy weight of reality. As the cameras turn off and the king retreats to his lonely vigil, we are left to wonder. In the fight between the ancient institution and the fragile human heart, who truly remains standing? The legacy is in the balance, and the reckoning has only just begun. Thanks for watching this deep dive analysis. The truth is often hidden in the silence. Don't forget to listen closely to what they don't say.